Manvantaras Lumaharshana next told the sages about the various Manvantara eras. Each of Brahma's days is referred to as a kalpa, cycle, and that there are 14 Manvantaras in each kalp. Each Manvantara is ruled over by a Manu and lasts for a duration of 30 crores 67 lakhs 20,000 years. The gods, the 7 great sages and the individual who holds the title of Indra change from one Manvantara to another. In the present Kalpa, 6 Manvantaras have already passed. The first Manu was Swayambhuva. The second Manu was Swarokisha. The gods then were the Tushitas and the Parvatas, and there were 24 such gods. Vaidha ruled as Indra then, and the 7 great sages were Ujya, Stamba, Kasyapa, Bhargava, Drona, Rishabha and Angira. The third Manu was Uttama. The gods then were the Sudhamanas, the Devas, the Pratadanas, the Satyas and the Shivas. The fourth Manu was Tamasa. The gods of this Manvantara were the Satyas, the Swarupas, the Sudhis and the Haris. Shiva held the title of Indra then, and the names of the 7 great sages were Kavya, Harsha, Kasyapa, Prithu, Atreya, Agni and Jyotirdhama. The fifth Manu was Ravta. The names of gods of this era were the Vipras, the Amrishas, the Supti and various others. The Indra of this period was Vibhu and the 7 great sages were Polastya, Vedavahu, Yaja, Hiranyaroma, Vedashri, Bhargava and Uruddhavahu. The sixth Manu was Chakshusha. The gods then was the Agyas, Prasutas, the Bhavyas, the Prithukas and the Lekhas. Manojva held the title of Indra and the 7 great sages were Havirdhana, Sudma, Vashishta Viraja, Polastya, Puleha and Madhuraitreya. The present Manu is known as Vavaswata and this is the 7th Manvantara of the present Kalpa. The gods of this era are the Adityas, the Vasis, the Rudras, the Sadhyas and the Vishwadevas. The title of Indra is held by Purandara and the 7 great sages are Vishwamitra, Jamdagni, Bharadvaja, Sharadvata, Gautama, Atri, Vasumna, and Vatsari. There will be 7 more Manvantaras in the future before the universe is destroyed. The 8th Manu will be Savarni. The 7 great sages then will be Galava, Bhargava, Dvapayana, Kripa, Diptimana, Rishyashringa and Ashwatakama. The gods will be the Amitabhas, the Sutapas and the Sukhas, and the title of Indra will be bestowed on Vali, the son of Virochna. The 9th Manu will be Meruswarni or Dakshaswarni. Adbhuta will hold the title of Indra then. The 7 great sages will be Skanda, Meltithi, Vasu, Jyotishmana, Dyutimana, Havyavhana, Sutapa and Vasita. The 10th Manu will be Dharmaswarni. The gods then will be the Sukmanas and the Viruddha. The title of Indra will be held by Shanti and the 7 great sages will be Havishmana, Sukirti, Atri, Apmurti, Pratipa, Nabhaga and Abhimanyu. The 11th Manu will be Bhavaswarni, alternatively known as Rudraswarni. The gods then will be the Nirmanarathis, the Kamajas and the Manojvas. The 7 great sages will be Havishmana, Vapurshamana, Varnui, Bhaga, Pushti, Nishchara and Agnaiteja and Vrisha will hold the title of Indra. The 12th Manu will be Ritaswarni. The gods then will be the Haritas, the Rohitas, the Sumnas, the Sukams and the Supras. The title of Indra will vest with Ritdhama and the 7 great sages will be Kriti, Sutapa, Tapomurti, Tapasvi, Taposhayana, Tapureti, and Tapomati. The 13th Manu will be Rauchya. The Sutramas, The Sudhamas and the Sukams will be the gods then. Devaspati will be the Indra and the 7 great sages will be Dhritimana, Patyavna, Tatvadashi, Niratsaka, Nishpakampa, Nirmoha and Swarupa. The 14th and final Manu will be Bhautya. Vena and Prithu. The 6th Manu was Chakshusha. One of Chakshusha's descendants was the great king Prithu, the son of Vena. Chakshusha had a son named Uru and Uru had a son named Anga. Agna married Sunita, and they had a son named Vena. Vena was evil, and when he became the king, he started to oppress the world and his subjects. The sages had no option but to kill Vena. The sages then began to knead Vena's dead body. When the right arm of the dead body was kneaded, Prithu was born. He emerged fully grown and with a bow and several arrows held in this hand. He was also dressed in invincible armor. Such was Prithu's radiance that he blazed like the flaming sun. The sages interrupted Lumahashana. How came Vena to be evil? They asked. And if Vena was evil, why wasn't Prithu evil as well? They asked. Vena's mother was Sunita and Sunita was the daughter of Mrityu was really evil. Right from his birth, Vena tended to associate with this maternal grandfather and thus picked up evil ways. He stopped believing in the Vedas. In fact, when he became king, Vena instructed that all yajnas should cease in his kingdom. There was no need to pray to the gods. The only person who was deserving of worship was Vena himself. The sages tried to persuade Vena to give up his evil ways and bring him back to the righteous path, but Vena refused to listen. It was then that the sages slew Vena. But Vena had no son. Who would be king in his place? There had to be a king, otherwise the kingdom would degenerate into anarchy. To obtain a son, the sages started to knead the dead body. When the left arm was kneaded, a dwarf was born as a result of the kneading. The dwarf was dark in complexion and exceedingly ugly. Sid the sages told the dwarf, Nishida. The word Nishida means to sit. All the evil that was in Vena's body went into the body of the dwarf, and the dead body was cleansed of all evil. The dwarf came to acquire the name of Nishda from the word Nishida. His descendants were also known by the same name and became a race of hunters and fishermen. They lived in the Vindhya mountains. Thus, when the dead body was kneaded again, there was no more evil left and Prithu came to be righteous. The word Prithu means plump. Since Vena's right palm was fairly plump and since Vena's son was born when the right palm was kneaded, the son acquired the name of Prithu. The sages arranged for Prithu's coronation. The waters of all the rivers and all the oceans were brought for this ceremony. All the gods graced the occasion by their presence. Thus it was that Prithu came to rule over the entire earth. He ruled well and his subjects prospered. The earth yielded an abundant supply of food grains. The cows were full of milk. It was at the time that Brahma organized a yajna. 2 classes of people known as the Sutas and the Magads were born from this yajna. They were actually crossbreeds. The Sutas were, for example, the offspring of Kshatriya fathers and Brahmana mothers. The sages asked the Sutas and the Magads to compose and sing songs in praise of the great king Prithu. Even since that day, the Sutas and the Magads became raconteurs who sang songs in praise of kings. The Sutas were asked to live in the region known as Anupa and the Magads in the region known as Magad. However, Prithu's subjects still did not possess any specific occupations. They therefore went to their king and said, "Please tell us how we may make a living." To achieve this end, Prithu decided to level out the earth. But the earth was scared and, adopting the form of a cow, started to flee. This angered Prithu and he pursued the earth with his bow in his hand. Wherever in the three worlds the earth fled to, Prithu followed. He was determined to kill the earth. Finally, the earth sought refuge with Prithu himself. "Please do not kill me," she said. "I am a woman and killing a woman is a crime. Besides, if you kill me, how will your subjects make a living? I have a better idea. I have adopted the form of cow. Milk me instead and your objective will be attained." Prithu did what the earth had asked him to. He milked the earth. As a result of this milking, seeds of food grains emerged and people could make a living out of these. Prithu also used his bow to level out the earth. Villages and cities could now be built in the plains. Earlier, these had been unknown. Agriculture, animal husbandry and trade had also been unknown earlier. It was after Prithu that the earth came to be known as Prithivi. This milking of the earth was in addition to the original milking of the earth that Brahma had performed. In fact, the earth was milked once in every Manvantara. The Prachetas Prithu had a son named Antadana and Antadana's son was Havirdhana. Havirdhana's son was Prachivahi. Prachinavi married Savarn, the daughter of the ocean. Prachinavi and Savarn had 10 sons known as the Prachetas. The Prachetas were interested in meditating. They performed tapasya for thousands of years under the oceans. They were actually supposed to rule the earth. As long as the Prachetas meditated, they did not rule. The earth became dense with forests. Trees grew everywhere and so dense was the growth that the wind could not blow. For the 10,000 years that the Prachetas meditated, their subjects suffered. The news of this mishap eventually reached the Prachetas and their anger was roused. Such was the fury of their anger that flames issued from their mouths and burned up all the trees. Soma was the god of the trees. When Soma saw that all the trees were being burned up, he tried to pacify the Prachetas. "Please restrain your anger," he said. "It is time for you to devote attention to getting married and having children so that the world might be populated. I have with me a woman named Marisha, a daughter of the trees. Please accept her as your wife." The 10 Prachetas married Marisha and a son named Daksha was born. Daksha's descendants have already been mentioned in the section on creation. The Vayu Purana now gives an account which is, in certain respects, contradictory to the earlier account. Daksha married Asikli, the daughter of Virana. Daksha and Asikli had 1,000 sons named the Haryashv. But the sage Narada persuaded the Haryashvas that there was nothing to be gained by being interested in the material world. These sons therefore forsook the world and went away to meditate. Daksha and Asikli then had another 1,000 sons known as the Shavalshvas. But Narada persuaded these sons also to go away and meditate. Thereafter, Daksha and Asikli had 60 daughters. 10 of these daughters were married to Dharma. 27 daughters were married to the moon god, Chandra. These were the 27 nakshatras, stars. Their names were Ashwini, Bani, Kritika, Pushya, Ashlesha, Punavasu, Purva Falguni, Uttara Falguni, Magha, Hesta, Chitra, Swati, Jayestha, Vishaka, Anuradha, Mula, Purvashda, Uttarashda, Shravana, Uttabhadrapada, Revati, Rohini, Mrigashira, and Ardra. 14 of Daksha's daughters were married to the sage Kasyapa and all living beings in the universe are descended from Kasyapa. The daughters who were married to Kasyapa were named Aditi, Diti, Danu, Kasa, Arishta, Sursa, Surbhi, Vinta, Tamara, Krosdhavasha, Ira, Kadru, and Muni. Aditi had 12 sons known as the Adityas. These were the gods. Surbhi pleased Shiva with her tapasya and obtained the 11 Rudras as her children. She was also the mother of all horses, cows, buffaloes and other quadruped animals. Diti's children, Diti's sons, were known as the Daityas, demons. Diti originally had two sons named Hiranyakashipu and Hiranyaksha. Hiranyakashipu was the elder. Kasyapa once organized an Ashwamedha Yajna, horse sacrifice. All the gods and the sages came to attend this sacrifice. A golden throne had been prepared for the chief priest. Diti was also present on the occasion then. She had, at the time, been bearing a baby for 10,000 years in her womb. When all arrangements had been made for the sacrifice, the baby was born. The newly born baby ascended the throne reserved for the chief priest and immediately began to recite the Vedas. It was this baby who came to be known as Hiranyakashipu. Hiranyakashipu hung upside down for 1,00,000 years and prayed to Brahma. Through this period, he fasted. This act of tapasya so pleased Brahma that he granted Hiranyakashipu a boon whereby the demon became invincible. Thus fortified, Hiranyakashipu started to oppress the world. He drove the gods out of heaven. Hiranyakashipu was eventually killed by Vishnu in his Narsimha, half-man half-lion, incarnation. Hiranyakashipu had 4 sons named Prahlada, Anuhlada, Sanhalada and Hlada. Hlada's son was Sanda and Sanda's wife was Tadka. It was this Tadka whom Rama, in the Ramayana, killed. Tadka's son was Mukha. Mukha was killed by Arjuna, in the Mahabharata. Prahlad's son was Virochana and Virochana's son was Vali. Vali was defeated by Vishnu in his Vaman, dwarf, incarnation. Vali had a son named Van. As for Hiranyakashipu's brother Hiranyaksha, he had 5 sons. They were named Okara, Shakuni, Kalanabha, Mahanabha and Bhutasanthapan. Hiranyaksha was killed by Vishnu in his Vara, boar, incarnation. Hiranyakashipu and Hiranyaksha had a sister named Singhika. Diti noticed that her sons and their descendants were suffering at the hands of the gods, often with the connivance of Vishnu. She therefore did her best to please her husband Kasyapa. Kasyapa was eventually satisfied and agreed to grant Diti a boon. Please grant me the boon that I may have a son who will kill Indra. Said Diti. This was slightly awkward for Kasyapa. The gods were also his sons, from his other wife Aditi. He told Diti that she would have to observe cleanliness for 100 years. If she succeeded in doing this, she would indeed give birth to a son who would slay Indra. But if she failed, the son would become Indra's friend and companion. This condition Diti accepted. Diti started to perform tapasya so that she might have the son she wanted. But Indra had got to know about what Diti was after. He hung around the hermitage, helping his aunt by fetching fruits, roots and wood from the forest. But this attempt at aiding his aunt was merely a pretext. Indra was the lookout for some unclean act that Diti might commit. 99 of the 100 appointed years passed. It was then that Diti made her first mistake. She was so tired that she fell asleep, resting her head on her thighs. In the process, her hair touched her feet. This was an unclean act. In a flash, Indra seized his opportunity. Now that Diti had committed an unclean act, he could freely enter her body. He entered Diti's womb and found the baby there. Indra possessed a weapon known as the Vajra. With the Vajra, Indra sliced up the baby into 7 parts. The parts began to cry and Indra said, Maruda, which means, Don't cry. But the parts continued to cry, and Indra carved up each of the parts into 7 more sections. There were thus 49 parts in all. Meanwhile, Diti had woken up, and she begged Indra not to kill her sons. Indra agreed. The sons were born. Because of the words Indra had uttered, they came to be known as the Maruts. Thanks to Kasyapa's boon, they became friends and constant companions of Indra. They were elevated to the status of gods. Kasyapa's other children. What of Kasyapa's wife Danu? Her sons came to be known as the Danvas, demons. Muni gave birth to the Gandharvas, singers of heaven, and Apsaras, dancers of heaven. Vinta had 2 sons named Aruna and Garuda. Their sisters were the mothers of all the birds. Kadru gave birth to the snakes, Nagas. Chief among them were Shesha, Vasuki and Takshaka. Kasa gave birth to sons. These sons were exceedingly ugly. The Yakshas, demigods who were companions of the god Kuber, were descended from the elder brother, and the Rakshasas, demons, were descended from the younger brother. Sursa's sons were other Rakshasas. Ira was the mother of all trees and herbs. Krudvasha gave birth to the ghosts, Pishachas. Tamra's children were wild animals. The ancestors. Who are the ancestors? Asked the sages. Lumaharshana recounted the following story. When Brahma first started to create, the gods were born. These gods not only did not worship Brahma, they started to create themselves. Brahma therefore cursed them that they would become ignorant. The gods did not relish this idea, they therefore tried to pacify Brahma. You will have to perform penance for your sins. Said Brahma. As for the means of penance, why don't you ask the beings whom you have created? They will instruct you in the ways of wisdom. The sons accordingly instructed the fathers. A person who instructs is known as a father, Pita. The sons of the gods according became like the fathers of the gods and are revered as the ancestors, Pitris. It is these Pitris who are given offerings at the time of Shraddha, funeral, ceremonies. In general, the Pitris also include dead ancestors and the 10 Prajapatis who rule over the universe. The ancestors had a daughter named Meena who was married to Himavana, the Himalayas. Meena, alternatively Menka, and Himavana had 3 daughters named Aparna, Ekprana, and Ekpatala. These 3 daughters meditated for 2000 years. Ekpatala meditated under a snake god, Patala, tree. Each day, she ate only one, Eka, snake god. It was thus that she came to acquire the name of Ekpatala. The word Parna means leaf. Ekprana ate only one leaf every day and thus acquired her name. Aparna ate nothing at all. Since she did not eat even a leaf, she came to be known as Aparna. Aparna was also known as Uma, and even as Parvati, since she was the daughter of the mountain, Parvata, Himavana. Parvati was married to Shiva. Their son was Skanda or Kumara. Skanda got separated from his parents and was brought up by the Kritikas, goddesses or nakshatras. He therefore obtained the name of Kartikeya. The solar line. The sun god Surya was born as the son of Kasyapa and Aditi. Surya was born as an egg, Anda. For days on end, nothing happened to the egg and the shell did not crack. Vishwakarma was the architect of the gods. When Vishwakarma found that nothing was happening to the egg, he cracked it open with a blow. Kasyapa was initially alarmed at this act, since he thought that the son who was inside the egg might have died. But he soon discovered that this was not the case and remarked, "The egg, Anda, has not died. From this expression, the son who was born came to be known as Marthanda. As Marthanda, Surya named Samjana, Vishwakarma's daughter. They had 2 sons and a daughter. The sons were named Yam and Vavaswati. This was the one who became a Manu. The daughter was Yami, or Yamuna. But so strong was the sun's radiance that Samjana could not bear to look at her husband. She eventually thought of a way out. She created an image who looked exactly like her. This image was called Chaya, shadow. I am going off to my father's house, replied Samjana. Please stay here and pretend to be Samjana. Take care of my children and under no circumstances divulge that you are Chaya. I will do what you ask, said Chaya. But there is a condition. I will not relate the truth as long as I am not cursed or as long as no one grasps me by the hair. But the moment this condition is violated, I will reveal all. Samjana agreed to this condition and left for Vishwakarma's house. Initially, Vishwakarma was quite happy to see his daughter. But days passed and Samjana did not return to her husband. Vishwakarma now realized that something must be amiss and cajoled his daughter to return to Surya. 8,000 years passed. Finally, Samjana could bear her father's scolding no longer. Pretending to return to her husband, she left Vishwakarma's house. She adopted the form of a mare and started to live in the region known as Uttarakuru. Meanwhile, Surya had not realized that Samjana had been substituted by Chaya. Surya and Chaya had parented 2 sons and a daughter. The sons were Savarni, who would become a Manu, and Shani, the planet Saturn, and the daughter was Tapti. Chaya was clearly more attentive towards her own children than towards Samjana's. Vyasa did not mind this at all. He was the eldest and more collected and balanced. But Yam resented this apparent partiality. In a fit of childish petulance, he kicked Chaya. You have dared to kick your father's wife, said Chaya. I therefore curse you that your feet will decay. It is with these feet that you have kicked me. Yam went and complained to Surya. He had sinned, but he was no more than a child. Might his transgression not have been overlooked on that account? Besides, whatever the provocation, does a mother ever curse her own son? Surya did what he could to mitigate the effects of the curse. But he also realized that something must be wrong. When he demanded to know the truth from Chaya, she revealed nothing. But when Surya threatened to curse her and grasped her by the hair, the conditions Chaya had made were violated. Chaya now revealed the truth. Surya went to Vishwakarma's house to find out where Samjana was. Hearing what had happened, Vishwakarma offered to slice off some of the sun's energy. It was, after all, the sun's great radiance that had motivated Samjana to do what she had done. Surya was not averse to this idea and his appearance was greatly improved by Vishwakarma's action. Surya got to know that Samjana was in the Uttarakuru kingdom in the form of a mare. He adopted the form of a horse and joined his wife there. As horses, Surya and Samjana had 2 sons named Nastya and Dasra. Since the word Ashv means horse and since these 2 had been born when their parents had adopted the forms of horse, they were also known as the 2 Ashwanis. They became the physicians of the gods. After the Ashwanis were born, Surya and Samjana returned to their original forms. Vavaswata Manu was the eldest son of Surya and Samjana. Vavaswata Manu performed a yajna so that he might have a son. But instead of a son, a daughter named Ila was born. Thereafter, 9 sons were born to Vavaswata. They were Ikshvaku, Nahusha, Drishta, Shayati, Narishanta, Pramshu, Nabhaga, Karusha, and Parishadra. The kings of the solar line, Surya Vamsha, were descended from Ikshvaku. In this line was born Rama of the Ramayana fame. Dhandu. In the solar line there was a king named Vrihadashva. He had 21,000 sons. The eldest son was known as Kuvalashva. When Vrihadashva aged, he decided to retire to the forest with his wife. As for the kingdom, he resolved that he would hand it over to Kuvalashva. But as the coronation ceremony was about to take place, a sage named Uttanka arrived in the capital. Uttanka told Vrihadashva, "King, please do not retire to the forest just yet. If you do so, we will not be able to meditate in peace. My hermitage is on the shores of the ocean and the seashore is frequented by a terrible demon named Dhandu. He is so powerful that even the gods cannot vanquish him. He hides under the sand and meditates. He exhales his breath once every year, and when he does so, all hell breaks loose. Terrible sandstorms are unleashed and the sun is shrouded in dust. For an entire week there are earthquakes. You cannot go away without doing something about Dhandu." Great sage, replied Vrihadashva, "I have given up my weapons. It would be most improper for me to take them up once again. As for Dhandu, take my son Kuvalashva with you. I am sure that he will vanquish the demon." Kuvalashva and his 21,000 brothers accompanied Uttanka. They came to the shores of the ocean and started to dig up the sand in their search for Dhandu. When the demon got to know about this, he unleashed a terrible storm. Tidal waves raged. Flames licked with tongues of fire. Dhandu's soldiers attacked Kuvalashva and his brothers. All the brothers except 3 were killed. But Dhandu had not reckoned with Kuvalashva. The storm, the waves and the fire could do Kuvalashva no harm. He killed the demon and thus acquired the name of Dhandumara. The sage Uttanka blessed him. Trishanku. Further down the line, there was a king named Traruna. His son was Satyavrat. Satyavrat was exceedingly strong. But such was his desire for riches, that he committed many sins. His father Traruna therefore decided to banish him. Traruna's chief priest was Vasishtha, and the sage also supported the king's decision. "Go away," Traruna told his son. "I do not wish to have a son who is like you." "What will I do and where will I live?" asked Satyavrat. "Go and live with the Chandalas, outcasts," his father replied. Satyavrata went and started to live with the outcasts. In due course, Traruna retired to the forest and there was no king to rule over the kingdom. In the absence of a king, anarchy prevailed. For 12 long years it did not rain and there was a terrible drought. Famine raged. At the time, the sage Vishwamitra had gone away to the shores of the great ocean to meditate. The sage's wife found it difficult to make both ends meet. There was no food to be had. She had no option but to sell off one of her sons in exchange for 100 head of cattle. With this wealth she proposed to feed herself and her remaining sons. The person to whom the son was sold tied a rope around the son's neck, gala, and proceeded to drag him away from the marketplace. The son thus came to acquire the name of Galava. Satyavrat discovered what was happening. He rescued Galava and he also made arrangements to ensure that Vishwamitra's wife and sons did not suffer in the sage's absence. The entire family was looked after by Satyavrat. Satyavrat killed deer and other wild animals in the forest. He brought the meat to Galava's family. He also tended to his father who had retired to the forest. One particular day, there was no game to be had. The sage Vasishtha possessed a cow. Satyavrat was not at all enamored of Vasishtha. The sage had, after all, recommended that Karuna banish his son. Satyavrat therefore stole Vasishtha's cow and slew it. He ate the meat himself and also fed part of it to Vishwamitra's family. Vasishtha was furious to learn this. He cursed Satyavrat. "You have committed 3 sins, Shanku, he said. You have stolen that which belonged to others. That is your first sin. You have caused unhappiness to your father. That is your second sin. And you have stolen and killed my cow. That is your third sin. Since you have committed three sins, I curse you that henceforth you will be known as Trishanku. After the 12 years of drought were over, Vishwamitra returned from his wanderings and was delighted to learn that Trishanku had taken care of his family in his absence. Despite Vasishtha's opposition, Vishwamitra arranged for Trishanku's coronation. As a sage, Vishwamitra had acquired great powers. He used these powers to send Trishanku to heaven in his mortal body. This was such a wonderful act that everyone marveled at it. Sagara. From Trishanku was descended a king named Vayu. Vayu was so addicted to material pursuits that he paid no attention to ruling his kingdom properly. Vayu's enemies seized the opportunity to defeat him and deprive him of his kingdom. Vayu and his wife fled to the forest. Chief among these enemies were the Hyahyas. But they were aided by the Taljangas, the Shakas, the Yavnas, the Paradas, the Kambojas and the Pahlavas. Vayu was old when this happened. Moreover, he was so grief-stricken at having lost his kingdom that he had lost all desire to live. He died in the forest. King Vayu had 2 wives. One of these was named Yadavi. The second wife was jealous of Yadavi and attempted to kill her by administering some poison. The poison, however, did Yadavi no harm. When Vayu died, Yadavi decided to immolate herself on her husband's funeral pyre. But the sage Avava intervened. "Please do not do that," he requested Yadavi. "You are expecting, and the act of killing the unborn baby would be a crime. Live and let him live. For he will rule well and will defeat his father's enemies." Persuaded by Avava, Yadavi did not kill herself. She began to live in the sage's hermitage. In due course, she gave birth to a beautiful boy. When the baby was born, the poison, Gara, also emerged. Since the word Sa means together with, the boy was given the name of Sagara. Avava took great interest in Sagara's upbringing and education. He taught the boy the Vedas and the art of fighting. There was divine weapon known as Agnayastra. Sagara also learned how to use this wonderful weapon from Avava. When Sagara grew up, he decided to tackle his father's enemies. The knowledge of the divine weapon had made him close to invincible. He defeated the Hyahyas, the Shakas, the Yavnas, the Kambojas, the Parada and the Pahlavas. But when he threatened to kill them all, these enemies sought refuge with the sage Vasishtha. The sage asked Sagara to spare them and saved their lives. But they had to be given some sort of punishment. Sagara decreed that the Shakas would have half of their heads shaved off. As for the Yavnas and the Kambojas, their heads were completely shaved off. The Paradas were instructed that they would have to sport long hair, and the Pahlavas were forbidden to shave their beards. King Sagara thus conquered these enemies and became the ruler of the entire world. He decided to perform a horse sacrifice to celebrate his victory. Sagara had 2 wives. They were named Keshini and Sumti. Sagara did not have any sons, and his wives pleases Avava with their prayers. Avava granted them boons that they would have sons. The stipulation, however, was that one wife would give birth to a single son who would ensure that the line went on. But the other wife would have 60,000 sons who would perish before having any children of their own. Keshini desired the single son and accordingly gave birth to Asmaja. Sumti gave birth to a god. The god was reserved in a vat of clarified butter. After 9 months had passed, 60,000 sons came out of the god. Sagara's sons prospered. When a horse sacrifice is performed, a horse is left free to wander where it wills. At the time when Sagara organized the horse sacrifice, he appointed his sons to look after the horse. These sons insulted the sage Kapila and were burnt into ashes. The lunar line Chandra or Soma was eighth son of the sage Atri. Atri was a very powerful sage. He was always busy meditating. For 3,000 years he performed tapasya, with his arms raised up into the air. He stood there, immobile like a tree trunk. As a result of this wonderful tapasya, energy issued out of his body. The goddesses who preside over the 10 directions assimilated this energy and produced Chandra. It was in this sense that Chandra was the sage Atri's son. Brahma gave Chandra a divine chariot to ride on. This chariot was drawn by 1,000 white horses. Chandra ascended the chariot and rode around the earth 21 times. While he was doing so, some energy from his body fell down on the earth. This was the origin of the herbs. Brahma appointed Chandra ruler over herbs, seeds, brahmanas and the water. Chandra performed a royal sacrifice, Rajasuya Yajna. The success of this ceremony, however, served to turn Chandra's head. The preceptor of the gods was Brihaspati, and Brihaspati's wife was named Tara. Although Chandra had already been married to 27 of Daksha's daughters, he abducted Tara. The gods and the sages requested Chandra to return Tara, but he would not listen. A terrible fight then raged between the gods and the demons, the gods fighting on Brihaspati's side and the demons on Chandra's. After Tara's name, this Sangrama, war. Finally, Brahma intervened and sorted the matter out. Chandra returned Tara to Brihaspati. But Chandra and Tara had a son named Buddha. You will remember Ila, Vavaswata Manu's daughter. Buddha married Ila and their son was called Pururava. Pururava was the originator of the lunar line. Pururava and Urvashi. Pururava was a good king who performed many yajnas. He ruled the earth well. Urvashi was a beautiful Apsara. Pururava met Urvashi and fell in love with her. Please marry me, he requested. I will, replied Urvashi, but there is a condition. I love these 2 sheep and they will always have to stay by bedside. If I ever lose them, I will remain your wife no longer and will return to heaven. Moreover, I shall live only on clarified butter. Pururava agreed to these rather strange conditions and the two were married. They lived happily for 64 years. But the Gandharvas who were in heaven felt despondent. Heaven seemed to be a dismal place in Urvashi's absence. They therefore hatched a conspiracy to get her back. On an appropriate occasion, a Gandharv named Vishwavasu stole the 2 sheep. As soon as this happened, Urvashi vanished and returned to heaven. Pururava pursued Vishwavasu and managed to retrieve the sheep, but by then, Urvashi had disappeared. The miserable king searched throughout the world for her, but in vain. Eventually, Pururava came across Urvashi near a pond in Kurukshetra. Why have you forsaken me? Asked Pururava. You are my wife. Come and live with me. I was your wife, replied Urvashi. I no longer am, since the condition was violated. However, I agree to spend a day with you when 1 year had passed. Urvashi returned to Pururava and presented him with the son she had borne him. She spent a day with him and vanished again. This happened several times and, in this fashion, Urvashi bore Pururava 6 sons. They were named Ayu, Amvasu, Vishwayu, Shatayu, Gatayu and Dridayu. Yayati. In the lunar line, there was a king named Nahusha. He had 6 sons and the youngest was named Yayati. After Nahusha, Yayati became king. Yayati had 2 wives. Shukracharya was the preceptor of the gods and Yayati married Devyani, Shukracharya's daughter. The king of the Danvas was Vrishpava and he had a daughter named Sharmishta. Yayati also married Sharmishta. Devyani gave birth to Yadu and Turvasu and Sharmishta gave birth to Druhaye, Anu and Puru. Yayati loved Sharmishta more. Shukracharya therefore cursed Yayati that he would suffer from the untimely onset of old age. When this happened, Yayati was miserable. He was still not content with what he had savored of the pleasures of life. He told his son Yadu, "Please take my old age and give me your youth in return. I will return your youth to you when I have finished pleasuring the joys of the world." "That I will not," replied Yadu. "Your old age is due to your own sins. Why on earth should I accept it? Please ask my brothers instead." These words angered Yayati and he curses Yadu that Yadu or his descendants would never be kings. Yayat next asked Turvasu, but again met with a refusal. A similar curse was therefore imposed on Turvasu and on Druhaye and Anu after him. The only son who readily accepted Yayati's request was Puru. Yayati blessed Puru and took his youth from him. Armed with this borrowed youth, Yayati savored the pleasures of the world and also performed many yajnas. When 1,000 years had thus passed, Yayati got tired of material pursuits. He returned Puru's youth and got back his own old age. Yayati retired to the forest, after having crowned Puru the king. As for Yadu, he was given some minor kingdoms that lay to the west. In similar fashion, Turvasu was given some kingdoms towards the southeast. Druhaye and Anu received kingdoms that lay towards the west, as had Yadu. The descendants of Yadu were known as the Yadvas. In this line was born Krishna. Also in this line was born Kartavirya Arjuna. Kartavirya Arjuna. There used to be a king named Kritavirya and Kritavirya's son was known as Kartavirya Arjuna. Arjuna performed tapasya for thousands and thousands of years. Through this meditation, he pleased the sage Dattatreya and obtained 4 wonderful boons from the sage. The first boon gave Arjuna 1,000 arms. The second boon gave him the power to use his persuasion to bring back evil people to the righteous path. The third boon was that he would conquer the entire earth and rule it according to the dictates of righteousness. The fourth and final boon was that Arjuna would meet his end at the hands of an individual who was in very way his superior. Having obtained these boons, Arjuna conquered the whole earth and ruled it well. He performed 10,000 wonderful yajnas. The gods, the sages, the Gandharvas and the Apsaras always attended these ceremonies. He ruled for 87,000 years. One of Arjuna's amazing deeds was his defeat and capture of Ravana, the king of Lanka. The sun god, Surya, once came to visit Arjuna in the disguise of a Brahmanda. "I am hungry," said Surya. "Please give me some food to eat. I will reward you well." "I am Surya. What sort of food will please you?" asked Arjuna. "What will I bring? I want to eat up all the material objects that there are on earth," replied Surya. "Please burn them up so that I may eat my fill." "How do you expect me to burn up all these objects?" asked Arjuna. I am only a human and have very limited powers. Surya then gave Arjuna many divine arrows and a wonderful quiver to keep these arrows in. These arrows had the property that they burst into flames as soon as they were shot. With these arrows, Arjuna burned up everything and Surya ate his fill. Hermitages, villages, cities and forests burned. Varuna was the god of the oceans and Varuna had a son named Ashwina. This son performed a lot of tapasya and became a sage named Vasishtha or Apava. Vasishtha performed tapasya under the water for 10,000 years. When he finished his meditations and returned to his hermitage, he found that the entire place had been burned up by Arjuna. Vasishtha was greatly incensed. "Since you have not spared my hermitage, I curse you," said Vasishtha. "No one who bears your name will ever again become a king. There will be a Pandav named Arjuna, the son of Kunti. But he will not be a king simply because he will bear your name. I also curse you that you will be killed by Parshuram." Arjuna was eventually killed by Parshuram. The gods and the demons. The gods and the demons did not like each other and fought several wars with each other. There were 12 such terrible wars. On one particular occasion, the demons were defeated by the gods. Extremely disheartened, they went to visit their preceptor, Shukracharya, son of sage Prithu. The demons told Shukracharya, "We have been defeated by the gods. We have no option but to go and reside in the underworld." "Don't be so disconsolate," replied Shukracharya. "I will protect you. I know that Brihaspati, the preceptor of the gods, has obtained wonderful powers by praying to the fire god, Agni. The gods thrive on these powers. I will pray to Shiva and obtain powers that can counteract these. Till I come back, please be patient. Why don't you give up arms and live as hermits till I return?" The demons agreed to this proposition. They informed the gods that they had given up arms and that the gods could do as they willed. They had become hermits and would not fight. Meanwhile, Shukracharya started to pray to Shiva. Shiva appeared before Shukracharya and discovered what the sage desired. Shiva was prepared to grant these powers, subject to a condition being met. Shukracharya would have to meditate for 1,000 years. And throughout this period, he would not be allowed to speak and would have to live on smoke. Shukracharya began this process of meditation. The gods got to know what was happening and decided that this was the opportune time to attack the demons. "What are you doing?" said the demons. "We have given up arms. This is not the time to fight." But the gods would not listen. The demons therefore fled to Bhrigu's wife and asked her to protect them. Through her powers, the saintly woman completely paralyzed Indra so that he could not move. At the sight of what had happened to their leader, the gods fled in disarray. "Why are you running away?" asked Vishnu. "As for you, Indra, enter my body. I will take you away from this place." Indra entered Vishnu's body and Vishnu proceeded to take him away. This angered Bhrigu's wife and she threatened to burn up both Indra and Vishnu. But before this could happen, Vishnu sliced off the lady's head with his Sudarshana chakra, a bladed discus. Bhrigu was aghast at this act. "Killing a woman is a sin," he told Vishnu. "You have committed a crime. For this crime, I curse you that you will have to be born several times on earth. As for my wife, through my powers I will resurrect her." This is what Bhrigu did, and this act terrified Indra. He got extremely worried that once Shukracharya returned, there would be no way of controlling the demons. Indra had a daughter named Jayanti. He told her, "Shukracharya is meditating. Please go and try to distract him." Make sure that his meditation is not successfully completed. Jayanti did as her father had asked her to. She started to frequent Shukracharya's hermitage and served him faithfully. In due course, Shukracharya's meditation was completed and he obtained the desired boon from Shiva. Once this task was accomplished, Shukracharya noticed Jayanti. "Who are you and what are you doing here?" he asked. "Why have you been serving me thus? In any case, I am pleased with what you have done for me. Please tell me what boon you desired." "Be my husband for 10 years," answered Jayanti. Shukracharya agreed. Shukracharya and Janati had a daughter named Devyani. Meanwhile, Brihaspati adopted Shukracharya's form and started to live with the demons. The demons were naturally glad to have their teacher back. They did not realize that the person whom they took to be their teacher was actually Brihaspati. After the 10 years were over, Shukracharya returned and found that the demons were following Brihaspati. "Who is this person whom you are following?" he asked. "Give him up." "I am the real Shukracharya." "Not at all," retorted Brihaspati. "I am the real Shukracharya." The demons did not know what to make of this. The two looked exactly alike and there was absolutely no way of telling them apart. Eventually they concluded that the person with whom they had been associating for the past 10 years must be their real guru, teacher. This choice so angered Shukracharya that he left in a huff. When the demons realized their mistake, they sought to pacify Shukracharya and bring him back. But the harm had already been done. The demons could not exploit the powers that Shukracharya had gained. Vishnu's incarnations. Because of Bhrigu's curse, Vishnu had to be born several times on earth. These are known as avatras, incarnations. The Vayu Purana now catalogues Vishnu's 10 incarnations. These are as follows. 1. Matsya or fish. 2. Narsimha or half-man and half-lion. 3. Vaman or dwarf. 4. Dattatreya, the sage. 5. Bhavya. 6. Parshuram. 7. Rama. 8. Vedavyas. 9. Krishna. 10. Kalki. Epilogue. Lumaharshana finished his recital of the Vayu Purana and told the assembled sages, "You are indeed lucky. You have heard that which is most sacred. This holy act will undoubtedly take you straight to heaven. A person who listens to a recital of this sacred text is rewarded with wealth, health and a long life. All the sins that a listener may have committed are forgiven." Do you know how the knowledge of this Purana was passed down through the ages? It passed from Vayu to Ushana, from Ushana to Brihaspati, from Brihaspati to Savita, from Savita to Mrityu, from Mrityu to Indra, from Indra to Vashishta, from Vashishta to Saraswata, from Saraswata to Tridma, from Tridma to Dhananjaya, from Dhananjaya to Kritanjaya, from Kritanjaya to Trinamjaya, from Trinamjaya to Bharadvaja, from Bharadvaja to Gautama, from Gautama to Nayantara, from Nayantara to Vajashrava, from Vajashrava to Somashushma, from Somashushma to Trinvindu, from Trinvindu to Daksha, from Daksha to Shakri, from Shakri to Parashara, from Parashara to Jatukan and from Jatukan to Vedavyas. I learned the Purana from the great Vedavyas himself. This is a lineage of sages that is truly sacred. If you enjoyed this audiobook, please like and subscribe to be notified of when new audiobooks are uploaded. Thank you for listening and learning. Shanti.